I did some napkin math, and the shadow markets that happen outside these games, they are potentially at least 2, but up to 5 times greater than the actual revenue of the underlying game.
So for the first time since the pandemic, 20 to 30,000 people converged on downtown San Francisco to talk tech and game design at GDC, Game Developers Conference 2023. It was a lot of fun, learned a lot. I got some fun stories to share.
Jordan was there and I wasn't, upsettingly.
Scott was not there.
I was in the backcountry skiing. It wasn't that bad, but I was not in downtown San Francisco enjoying the Game Developers Conference.
Did you interview any hackers in the mountains?
No. There were oddly a lot of engineers in the backcountry. Which
that tracks.
Should come as very little surprise. Yeah, exactly.
So I got some fun stories to share about San Francisco. But most importantly, I managed to track down and have a conversation with a guy named Adrian. Adrian has had a very strange job for like 20 years. He's a guy who, if you listen to other shows about weird tech stuff, you might recognize him from back when he went by his alter ego, Manfred. Adrian is a professional video game hacker. He's been doing it for profit for about as long as there's been any profit to be made hacking video games. So amidst all the craziness of GDC, I managed to track him down for an interview. He was kind enough to sit down with me in a quiet corner of this giant place where it's very tough to find a quiet corner, talking into our cell phones. Game hacking has changed a lot over the last 20 years, and how he's navigated the ethical boundaries of a line of work where those boundaries are shifting and blurry was really, really interesting. So this is that. Adrian the Video Game Hacker and GDC 2023 recap here on Hacked. You're back from the mountains. How you doing, Scott?
You're back from San Francisco. How are you doing, Jordan?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be back. I had a really good time, but it's a busy time, so it's nice to be back home. You're back from the mountains. You feeling?
I am
recreationed up, rested up.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say rested is the appropriate adjective, but recreationed, definitely. If that is an adjective, that is how I feel. So no, it was fun. It was fun. It's always good to get away. It was spring skiing, so it was conditions were. I thought they were going to be far more questionable than they were. We ended up having really good snow and. The hikes in and out. We were touring, so we were hiking into the backcountry and skiing, and then hiking back into a hut to sleep and in dirty little packed cabins, eating dehydrated food, which is always fun.
Yeah, sounds awesome.
But it was a good time. We got out of the backcountry, had a day off, and went hot springing, which is always nice for rest and recovery. And yeah, then we're back. Endured the 12-hour drive home and got home last night just in time to make this lovely episode.
Just in time.
So wait, I need to know how in a conference of 20,000 people you managed to track down like this one person who's super relevant.
Well, I'm just like an intrepid reporter, like I'm just like a gumshoe detective, boots on the ground. No, I found his contact information on the internet like anybody would. A buddy of mine, we'll talk about this later, but a buddy of mine went to a talk that he gave at this event.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, oh, wow, we got to talk about that.
Very cool.
But before we get to that, I've just been thinking about something pretty much the whole time, which is that I want to thank Zach for supporting us on Patreon.
Really?
Yeah.
Just Zach? Or are there more people you'd like to thank?
Well, I want to start with Zach.
Okay.
Who went to hackedpodcast.com and supported us on Patreon. Great way to support the show. I want to thank Zach. And
I want to thank Danzar.
Oh, that's a good point.
And Alan and Johan.
And Nalij and Darren.
Yeah, and Evan, Ryan, Jacob.
Yeah, sure. But don't forget about Rob.
Oh, of course not. Okay.
And finally, drum roll, Anders, who are all kind enough to support the show at hackedpodcast.com.
And many of whom have popped into our Discord.
Yeah,
So
who have popped into Discord. The Discord's been fun. So we produce all the music for the show, and someone was asking kind of just about the music, and then brought up the idea of sharing some stuff they've been making. So we created a channel in the Hacked Discord where you can share cool stuff you made. It's called Share Cool Stuff You Made. And it's great. Like, there's very talented people in there, like funky tunes, rapping that easily puts Razzlecon to shame. There's a lot of really talented folks in there.
they listen to us. So what's the best way to put this? We lack the talent, so they must bring it.
Yeah, sure. There's an equilibrium of talent. It's mostly on them.
Exactly.
If you want to join, hackedpodcast.com.
Sweet.
Let's start with GDC. Let's chat a little bit about
GDC.
Game Developers Conference. Like I said, 25,000 people, all converging on downtown San Francisco. It's a bit of a pressure cooker. Talks themselves, fantastic. Learned a lot. Game design, game music, everything from writing like big AAA musical themes, sampling Kawasaki motorcycle engines to make anti-gravity racing sound design, hiding Easter eggs in music with spectrograms. Just cool, fun stuff. Also a very funny experience.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So San Francisco, kind of birthplace of the gig/shared economy. Wild how many times it just collapsed out from under our feet. Question for you, Scott.
Shoot.
Have you ever wondered what happens if your Airbnb host dies?
While you're staying there?
Prior to your arrival, but too late for you to book something else.
Okay. I've never thought about this. See, I would assume if you've checked in that you could just claim like salvage rights almost and just squat there as long as you want.
Squatters' rights?
But squatters' rights.
Yeah.
But prior to your arrival, I'm hoping that there was some form of property management company in the middle of that.
Right.
To facilitate. Why don't you, this sounds like you have experience in this, so why don't you share this lovely story?
Yeah. I'll spare all the gritty details, but when the guys I was traveling with got there, it was a VRBO. They got there before me. There were people just living there. If anyone has seen the film Barbarian, it evoked that. And those folks that were living there had bought it a month before from whoever inherited it, from whoever owned it, who did die. And our reservation, through some confusion over like 2 months, just sort of persisted through all of that.
Wow.
So we found ourselves trying to book a hotel on the first day of a massive conference that sells out every hotel in the city for like a mid-sized group, which was tricky.
And very expensive, I'm sure.
Not an affordable proposition, let me tell you. We ended up in the last group Airbnb in San Francisco. It was like the last one that could accommodate all of us that was available. We managed to get it.
How far away from the venue? Had to be far.
Medium far, price, like value for what you got. I'll just say it was the nicest concrete box I've ever stayed in.
See, I was thinking about this actually just yesterday on the drive home. I was thinking about how, like, you know, surge pricing in Uber.
Yep.
It's like it's truly based on.
I got a story about Uber.
It's truly based on supply and demand. I'm sure you do. When 24,000 people try to get Ubers back to their Airbnbs, I'm sure the price of them goes wild. But like airlines, it's funny how we've accepted. Like when people hear about surge pricing, people still get mad about Uber, you know. But the hotel market and the airline market have been running this model for
years.
For like since they existed. Like if you buy a ticket especially on a discount airline, the first 10 tickets on the plane are like free.
Right.
Like you're not even paying for the gas. But the last 10 tickets are like obnoxiously expensive, like way more than they should be. And it's like they've been working that supply demand model forever. So it's like I feel like, you know, the hospitality and hotel thing, same thing. So it's like if you're booking the last one, if the person managing that listing is, you know, halfway economically inclined, you're probably paying 4 times what you should be.
For sure. It was the end of the first day of the conference too. So by that point, you just ratchet up the price and see what you can get. It's like you're going fishing.
Of course.
Maybe someone is desperate enough to do it. And we were. Because we needed shelter.
So you literally like Uber from the airport to a house that is full of people who were like, "Who are you and why are you here?" Or were they so used to this at this point because this guy had pre-sold out like months of bookings prior to passing away?
I wasn't there when my buddies arrived before me, so they got to have this interaction. I just found out about it shortly after. So I don't know how many times they had dealt with this, but I have to think it wasn't the first.
Yeah.
That they've been living in this weird ghost Airbnb rental for the last month and a half, waiting for these to sort of just like peter out. And it would make sense that GDC, this giant event, would be the last spike of people saying, "Do I live here tonight?"
Yeah.
And them having to say, "No, I live here always. You don't get to stay here."
Oh man, that's a very strange one. You're the first time I've heard a tale like that.
First time for everything. But the conference itself was great. Interestingly, and this comes up a bit in our interview, so I think it's worth talking about. I went, say, 5 or 6 years ago. This all happens in Moscone Center. Moscone, this big center, multiple city blocks in the middle of downtown. It's the big venue for big tech shows in the city of big tech, so it's large. And whether you're in the building with the talks or the big expo hall, there's always these massive banners billowing from the roof, brands that have sponsored the event. 5 or 6 years ago, it was Ubisoft, Sony, Blizzard. But now, Metaverse, Web3, crypto. Metaverse, Web3, crypto.
That is, yeah, I guess when you look at like developing markets, right? Like the Metaverse is like
That's the one.
Yeah, it's the developing market, or the market that they hope develop.
That they're trying to brute force it.
They're prospecting.
All the free talks, that's the stuff sponsoring them. A lot of the parties, that's what's sponsoring them. A big audience that doesn't always love that stuff, gamers. So there's this constant tension in the talks and on the floor and at these events between people trying to very intensely sell a product to a targeted audience of people that don't like that product. We ended up at an evening event where the sponsor, a big cryptocurrency company I will not name, did want to speak to this live audience, but didn't want to physically show up. So we got to watch this MC of this in-person kind of boozy event subject a large audience to a Zoom call with the sponsor projected on the wall.
Oh my God.
And think what you will about that whole space, but this dude just launched into like a crypto bullshit speed run. Like he was just knocking down all the big hits. People were not happy. People walked up and left. It looped all the way back around from being pretty irritating to the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Oh man. That's such a strange, like, to spend all that money. Like we've been to some big like film and TV production events and stuff. We've been to these big parties before. They cost a boatload of money. and then to not even show up for it.
Let me zoom in.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Was it Sam Bankman-Fried live from his like penthouse prison?
I have a story about that.
Okay.
But regardless.
It was.
I also met, no, it wasn't, but yeah, we'll talk about that. I met someone, if we're just kind of going through the funny stories before we get to this long interview that's coming up. I met someone, I'm going to be very discreet because he was a very nice, smart guy. He spent the last, say, 6 months to a year working on what is probably going to be a very successful startup. But he was doing the van life thing during all this. He was living in a van, working on his startup. And he mentioned offhandedly that he'd ended up in a van commune, like a proper commune, people doing peyote in the woods type thing.
Okay.
Which, like,
checks out.
Yeah, like tell me more. Like, this is
you've piqued my interest.
You piqued my interest. But it's San Francisco at GDC, so I slowly started to realize like it wasn't an old-fashioned peyote van commune. It was like a crypto peyote van commune. I kept getting hints of like, oh, it's governed by a DAO. which for anyone that doesn't know is a decentralized autonomous organization, like blockchain government, basically.
Wait, the commune is governed by a DAO?
The peyote crypto van commune is governed by a DAO.
Oh, man.
And it costs a lot of money to park your van, which is a very Silicon Valley innovation of monetizing parking a van outside. And then I found the website, and it's great.
You got to be slacking that to me or putting that in the Discord.
I'm going to slack it to you. We're not going to say the name.
No.
Because I don't think they recognize themselves as a peyote van commune, even though it sounds like people are doing peyote there. But it's like a van commune where you can do peyote, but it has the website of like a millennial meal prep kit startup. So it's like Burning Man, but brought to you by a drop shipping mattress company.
Oh, man. I just don't think you and I live enough, Jordan. Like, we aren't experiencing these things. Like, when did we get old?
I want to go live in the woods, governed by a DAO, doing drugs with crypto bros.
Is the gentleman you're speaking of, was he starting a crypto startup, or was it like a startup of something that provides utility?
No, he was starting like a real company that provides utility. Really nice dude, and I think the company is like, it's a cool company. He was not of that cohort.
Let's just, well, we're hitting on crypto here.
Yeah, sure.
Did you see the NVIDIA CEO?
No.
Like, NVIDIA's record profits for the last like 10 years have been paid for by crypto miners, right? Like their graphics cards cost us lowly gamers so much money because there's crypto bros that want to buy them and make crypto with them.
Sure. Especially during the pandemic. It was this like face-off between people that wanted to game at the highest quality level and people that wanted to print cyberbucks. Yeah, I'm familiar.
When Ethereum changed from what was it, proof of work to proof of stake, it just like collapsed the need to mine. So like all of a sudden, NVIDIA was selling no graphics card. Anyway, so long story short, the NVIDIA CEO gave a speech the other day and essentially came out and said that crypto is providing no utility to mankind and they need to pivot away from it. And that AI is and that AI is the future. He essentially told people that they should just be deserting crypto and walking away from it after like taking their money for like 10 years. I was like, oh my God.
The guy selling the gold picks was like, gold is useless.
Yeah, this is actually all fool's gold. But thanks for all
amazing.
Thanks for all this so long, and thanks for all the shoes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So many of the things we saw that were weird. There's a lot of money in games. There's a lot of weird stuff. But there's also a higher percentage of like really creative, talented, passionate people that we met there than most other industries. I know you do games work. It's like there's just a lot of really cool people. So for all the weird stuff you see when you're at a thing like this, it's kind of impossible not to also have a pretty great time.
Yeah. I'm very envious, and I think next year I'm gonna have to pre-schedule it into my calendar.
Yeah, man, come with. We'll all go down to San Francisco and hope our Airbnb hosts make it.
Well, I was watching a lot of the announcements. There is some pretty cool tech that came out. You know, all the new changes to Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
There was the path tracing and the ray tracing updates for NVIDIA and a bunch of AMD graphics stuff. Like there was just a bunch of cool things.
Really cool stuff.
The world of games and AI. Well, we could talk about AI too, but we don't have to. but we could save that for another episode. But very, very cool stuff. We're making a lot of leaps. And also, as a strange shout out, the gentleman who Moore's Law is named after passed away.
Oh.
And it's very strange because you hear a lot of people talking. Gordon Moore co-founded Intel, created Moore's Law. You hear a lot of people talking now, like the new NVIDIA chipsets and the new AMD chipsets and stuff. They're no longer like they're revolutionary increases, and they're breaking. Like you hear a lot of chatter about how Moore's Law is being broken, and then Gordon Moore passes away. Just such a strange coincidence for me, anyway, when I saw that happen. So, anyway, a shout out to Gordon Moore. Thank you for all you did, and thank you for your law. And rest in peace.
Yeah, shout out to Gordon Moore. Kind of changed the way we think about the way computers advance over time. And I think did a lot more than just Moore's Law, like a very interesting human being.
Oh, for sure. Well, like think about the world without Intel.
Completely.
Like love him or hate him. Depends if you're team red or team blue, doesn't matter. But like think about the world without Intel.
No denying the impact.
Exactly.
So I thought we weren't going to have an episode, and we were probably just going to want to do a rerun because you were in the mountains and I was
in San Francisco
hanging out with crypto peyote people. But as we discussed earlier, while we were there, a buddy of mine went to a talk, and I thought, oh, it seems like someone our audience might really like to hear from for like the hour that is about to follow. I'll read you the talk description. This speaker, Adrian Bednarek, will use his 20 plus years of experience in exploiting online games to provide information for current and upcoming developers on common and advanced techniques used to exploit online games. Attendees will learn what happens in the shadowy depths of online game hacking, along with the threat actors and tools used, and be better equipped on how to protect their games against emerging threats. And I was like, I feel like hacked folks might really enjoy hearing from this guy.
I feel like I would have gone to that if I was there.
Yeah, our buddy Jeremy went, and it sounded like a really great talk. So pop on my intrepid reporter cap, see if I can get a hold of him. Trouble, it's a talk. I didn't see it, but I get the sense it was relatively technical. So, first step, contact and link up with Adrian, the video game hacker. Step 2, get him to take me through this in terms I can understand. And he did a really great job at both. We recorded this on our cell phones, but AI voice cleanup has gotten pretty good over the last few months. So there's a few moments here where it sounds a little garbled, especially on my microphone, but I'd say his phone and the software working together did a pretty great job. Chopped it up a little bit to condense things and remove some moments when the garble got bad, but it's relatively intact. Adrian has been hacking games since Ultima Online. You ever play that?
I never did, actually. I have friends that worked on it.
Oh, interesting.
But I never actually played it. I know.
Huh. So we sat down and we started there at the beginning of his story, sitting down at the far end of a hallway, off a hallway, off a hallway, where it was quiet enough to talk under this weird lighting thing that reminds you of kind of like a UFO.
We are in the equivalent of a back alley at GEC behind a purple velvet curtain, I guess. Maybe Elvis performed here back in the day. And there's an arrangement of lights above us in a circle that looks like a UFO that's about ready to beam us up.
We talked about his history, 20 years of Wild West games cheating, how games get monetized today and how they'll be monetized in the future. This idea that rather than fixed prices or even in-app purchases, that maybe the future of games looks less like a store and more like a government taxing transactions between players. Fortnite just released the design of their Player Economy 2.0. Something's changing in the way that works. And really, a theme we kept looping around to, this idea of digital scarcity that has had such a big impact on his career and whether it is fundamentally an illusion. Here's my interview with Adrian Bednarek, video game hacker. Hope you enjoy.
Take care.
Who are you and what is it you do?
So that's complicated. Online, I'm known as Manfred, but my real name is Adrian Bednarek. I tried to keep the two separate for a while, but people just figured things out. I didn't really care all that much. So right now I'm just, I'm going as both, but, you can call me Manfred or Adrian, either way.
Did you do other kinds of hacking, or was that really your identity in the world of video game hacking?
So Manfred is interesting because I got my start in cybersecurity. Well, my background is in cybersecurity and software engineering. And when I was a college student back in 1997, this game called Ultima Online came out. And I was very much into PvP, like in that game. That game was pretty ruthless. There were no rules. It was the Wild West. If you died to another player, you lost everything. Like they just take all your stuff off of your corpse. So I was in a bunch of PvP groups, guilds, and it was common at the time to have very inappropriate names. That was the Wild West of video gaming back in the mid-90s. And my name was, I went around PKing as a character named Fuckchop. Phuckchop. I spelled it that way to get past the profanity filter when naming your character, right? So one day a GM came up to me and he's like, "We're getting a lot of complaints. You're killing a lot of players in the game. You're like looting their corpses and what amounts to, I guess, what you'd call this day as griefing, like, excessive PvP ownership of things." So the GM was like, "That's all cool and everything. You can kill other players. That's part of the game. You're doing it a lot, which is, you must have a lot of spare time on your hands," which I did. Like, I was playing this game like 8 hours a day. But he's like, "I can't have you running around with as Fuckchop." Yeah. And so he just randomly renamed me to Manfred. And I was like, that's kind of a cool name. It sounds fancy. I'll go around PvPing as Manfred. And I just stuck with that name ever since. So I was named by a game master in Ultima Online.
Was that the first game that you ever cheated in? It was the first multiplayer game. Was it the first game at all that you ever cheated in?
Cheating in games is interesting because it differs greatly depending on if you're cheating in a single player game or a multiplayer game. I mean, I'm sure everybody's played board games and, you cheat to troll or whatever. If you're playing Monopoly, you'll pull some extra money out of somebody else's pile. So, I mean, I think everybody cheats. It's natural, but Ultima Online was the first popular MMORPG that ever came out. And that's what really got me interested into the security aspects of it, because I was like, how does this game work? How does this client-server architecture work? Like, if I delete my game and like reinstall Windows, I think it was Windows 95 back in the day, I was like, if I reinstall the game, will my character still be there? Will my house be there? Will my items be there? Everything was saved on the server. So I just wanted to figure out how all that stuff worked. So I took apart the client, and then I took apart the communications protocol, see how the communication between the client and the server worked. And then I just started finding exploits, create infinite amounts of money out of thin air, create items out of thin air. UO had an interesting thing because they had real estate that was scarce. The map in Ultima Online was a 2D map, and you could only place so many houses on there. So there was a real estate boom, and if you owned a house, you were pretty rich in this game. And I was researching the security around player housing, because there was a function in Ultima Online where you could demolish your house and you'll get the house deed back. So you can place your house somewhere else. Okay. So I was like, how does this work? And then I was like, could somebody else delete my house? So I did some investigative research, and I was like, let me try and demolish my house, capture that data packet that the client is sending to the server, and let me change that ID of the house that's in the packet with my neighbor's house. Surely that can't work, right?
You wouldn't be able to grab their house kind of thing.
Yeah, so I sent this packet with their house ID, and I demolished their house. And I was like, oh shit.
Found something.
Yeah. That was definitely my first huge exploit that got me thinking. The light bulb went off, and I was like, interesting.
So you'd found something with scarcity in the system, and you'd found a way to just sort of pluck it out from in the almost like the crawl space on the walls of the game. You found a moment when it was vulnerable.
Yeah. So there, I like to say there's always a bigger game behind the curtain, and this illusion of scarcity that existed in Ultima Online by having items and currencies and housing be scarce was, it's an illusion. And if you dig into how the game works and go under the hood, you'll find the game behind the curtain, and that you can play it in different ways.
What was your next step after that? You figure out this way that you can grab a house deed or something. Where do you go from there?
So when I discovered that, obviously I deleted my neighbor's house, and I felt pretty bad about that because players in Ultima Online typically had around 20 to 40,000 items that they stored in a house. So when I demolished that house, everything fell to the ground, and over time it just decayed and disappeared out of the game. So I felt pretty bad about that, and I didn't want to go around and deleting and delete other players' houses because that's kind of an ethical line I didn't want to cross. But then I continued on and investigated other features in the game to see if there were exploits in them. Being able to create gold out of thin air was interesting. And I created bots to place houses when other players' houses were demolished. So Ultima Online was interesting because when you place the house, you had to log back in to refresh it. Otherwise, you could have a dormant account, tie up real estate. So they implemented a cleanup system. Like if you didn't log into the game for 2 weeks, your house would automatically demolish. So I wrote some scripts and bots to go around and find houses that are about to be demolished by the game. And I placed other houses and castles in their place. And I was a broke college student back in the day, and I knew that people wanted houses in this game. It was very valuable. And eBay was also a thing. I think eBay came up in like 95 or 96. And I was like, what would happen if I sold a castle on eBay? So I listed the castle on eBay, and I was expecting to get like 50 or $100 because there was nothing else like it. I didn't have anything to do market research on. So I did a 3-day auction, was expecting to get 50 or $100. And then 2 days in, a bidding war started. The castle was selling for like 500, 600. Whenever I'd refresh the eBay page, it went up by like $100. And then the auction closed at like $30, $200. So I was very happy.
Yeah, for a broke college kid, that's pretty wild.
Oh yeah, that was a pretty good payday. There was also a follow-up challenge to that because the person that bought it from me, he was an airline pilot out of Alaska. And, we had communications back and forth, and I was like, hey, send me the money. I'll log into the game and I'll transfer my castle to you. And he was like, no, you log into the game first and give me the castle, and then I'll send you the money. Because, we didn't trust each other.
Yeah, why would you trust each other? Yeah.
You're in the trustless Wild West metaverse of the 90s. So we tried to use an escrow service out of New York that typically dealt with fine art. Like if you want to sell a painting, they'll take possession of the painting and they'll take money and then transfer everything to the appropriate parties. So we called them up and we're like, hey, can you guys do you guys have like Windows 95? Can you install Ultima Online, and then can I transfer a castle to you, and then you guys take a payment from this guy, and then like settle this deal? And long pause, a couple of and we basically got hung up on. So by this point, we kind of had, this was going on for a few days. We kind of developed a little bit of trust. We exchanged phone numbers, chatted on the phone, and he was like, fine, I'll just send you the money, give me the castle. And we did that. We were both happy. And then I continued doing that, selling houses and gold and Ultima Online through my college days. And I graduated in 2001 debt-free thanks to this video game called Ultima Online.
Whoa. Where did most of that money come from? Was most of it in fungible stuff? Was it mostly gold, or was it mostly these houses?
This is a huge rabbit hole. I sold many interesting things. I sold some bugged items in the game that would give players an advantage. It's a bit of a technical rabbit hole, but I'd say 50-50. Gold was in very high demand. I think 1 million gold was selling for like $300 in like around 98. Over time, the value of gold went down as players quit the game. There was less demand for gold. I think when I stopped selling gold in Ultima Online around 2002, I was selling 1 million for like $50 or something like that. But the volume was great. Like, you were making pretty good money every week, and the payouts were good. I mean, you list something on eBay, you get paid. You log into the game and you transfer to gold. So I mean, it was really quick, rapid transfers. And then eBay banned the practice of selling virtual goods sometime around 2003.
Good.
But anyway, when I graduated in 2001, I had a decision to make. Do I want to go work for Microsoft in a cubicle or some other big tech company? Or do I want to keep hacking games? So I was like, hacking games for profit in an ethical way, because the game companies weren't selling gold and castles and houses to the players directly. I was filling an unmet demand. So I was like, this really isn't a job. I'm playing video games, figuring out puzzles, hacky puzzles, cybersecurity puzzles. Like, how does this game work, and what are the security guarantees, and can they be bypassed? So I just continued doing that for about 20 years. And my main source of income was from, hacking online video games and their virtual economies from 97 to 2017.
I mean, that marketplace has evolved so much since then. If you're talking about from when you would have graduated college, when, eBay was still selling digital goods, that was so early in all of this. Like, was there anybody looking for you as you were rummaging around doing all this stuff? Was there anyone on the defensive side trying to stop you, or were you just alone in the house with the lights off by yourself?
Yeah, so when I was signing up for my accounts, I was using my real name. I was using like a VPN. I wasn't trying to hide. There were really no efforts made by the game company back then to monitor or have analytics on this sort of activity to identify, people that are using accounts for real money transactions and things like that. So it's pretty much free reign. Ultimately, I had a lot of exploits. Whenever an exploit would go public and there was an uproar from the community, the game developers would fix it. But if you found your own exploit and you didn't pass it around or make it public, then it existed until you got bored of it.
After Ultima Online, you graduate. Where do you go next? What game do you kind of move your operation to?
So there was a small game that most people don't know about. It's called Anarchy Online from Funcom. That was technically the second game. Around the same time, this game called Dark Age of Camelot came out. That was my major game. I had an exploit in that game. Well, that game had multiple exploits where you could create infinite money out of thin air and items. But that game had one exploit that lasted for 13 years before they discovered it. And I think they discovered it by accident. The exploit lasted from year 2001 to 2014.
What was it?
Without getting too technical, I was able to shortcut or I guess abuse the login system is a bad phrase, but exploit the login workflows and logout workflows to basically log into the game, pass a bunch of items and gold to a mule account, and then cause the game to reload my character again before I got a chance to save my old character. So I could log in again with everything I had 5 minutes ago and just infinitely do that over and over again. Log in, pass all my stuff over to a mule account, trigger another login event that would act on stale data that was stored in the database. So I could just reload an old save state of my character and just dump a bunch of golden items onto a mule character. And that lasted for 13 years.
I mean, that's such a long period of time. You're going so many different games, and you'd be doing some things where there's scarcity and some things where there isn't. When there is scarcity, did you ever find some ethical red lines that you weren't really willing to cross, where you go, yeah, there's a way to make a buck here, but I'm not sure that I should?
My ethical red line that I never crossed was I never wanted to do anything that would hurt the game company's profit or reputation. There's an asterisk to that, because if you look up Hackers Put the Bane in Shadowbane, that was back in 2002, and that was a game that had many security flaws, and I kind of went wild with that one. But it was interesting. So in that game, I was able to basically have admin-like powers. I was able to log into the game, look at other players' bank accounts, teleport to other players, insta-kill other players, summon NPCs or monsters. So me and a few of my friends, we were like, this game really isn't that great. Probably doesn't have a future. Let's have some fun with it. We have all these cool exploits, so let's go in and troll some people. So we logged in, we teleported entire cities of players under the water. So they started slowly drowning, but they weren't drowning fast enough. It would have taken them a few minutes for their characters to die. So we're like, this is kind of boring. They're just down there, kind of filing GM help tickets to help them get out of this drowning situation. So we started spawning dragons and monsters under the water with them to like shoot fireballs at them and just create complete mayhem. And in the aftermath of that, we were looking at the forums of Shadowbane, and some of the players were like, what just happened? That was insane. And there was a bunch of players that said, this is the most fun I ever had in this game. So, on one hand, I kind of went overboard, but on the other hand, everybody had fun, and it is just a game. Nobody got hurt. Yeah.
Something really funny about we maybe went overboard, and then the visual of just like a city underwater with dragons attaching. You're like, I should think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does it go from there? You've been working at this for a while. It sounds like you've really perfected your craft at this point.
Yeah, so, hacking for profit sounds really bad, but I knew I was doing it in an ethical way, so I had no problem with it. But, you want to stay stealthy. You don't want your exploits to get discovered. So I pretty much stayed underground for the longest time. Like, my job was to just target the game, reverse engineer it, see how it works, find some exploits in it, and then provide virtual currencies and items to players in games that didn't provide these items to the players directly. And if there was a game that provided items and currencies to players directly, that's a game I wouldn't target. For example, around 2013, it was kind of a lull in the gaming industry. There were like not many new MMOs being released. So I was talking with a person I was selling goods and items wholesale to. They were based out of China, and I was like, hey, what are some good games these days? Like there's not really much going on. And the guy told me, he's like, hey, can you do FIFA online? And I was like, interesting. I've never like really looked into it. And then I was like, is it pretty good? Is it worth my time? Like, how much could I make? And he's like, dude, the demand is insane for this game. Like, everybody loves trading, FIFA Ultimate tokens, I guess they called them back then. And he's like, I could buy like $500,000 worth of tokens per day from you. And I was like, let me think about this one. So I did some research, and it turns out EA was selling these tokens directly to players. So I passed on that.
Right.
So definitely don't want to cross that line. If people want to look into that story, just search for FIFA hackers. There's a few people that went after FIFA. They actually made millions off of it. And the result was a set of sad stories.
So you developed this personal rule that if this game is willing to create marketplaces, sell products to players, allow them to sell to each other, you weren't interested in touching that. You were only going to create those markets in games that weren't. FIFA was on the far side of that line, so you said you weren't going to touch it, but some other people did.
Yeah, 100%, and they got burned. I knew that would happen. That's why I didn't do it. It was unethical. It was crossing a lot of red lines. You opened you up for legal exposure, and that's exactly what happened to, the guys that went after FIFA. They did really well at first. They made millions, but the law came down on them, and, it was a very sad outcome out of that.
Yeah, sure. It sounds like a well-written rule in retrospect to have to like don't. Yeah, okay. So you've gone from I'm just a hacker. I'm gonna throw cities under the water, attack them with dragons. You've sort of refined what you're doing, and you've moved into, okay, if there's not a marketplace, I can create one using this skill set, and I can facilitate these transactions and stuff.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so early on it was hacking for fun and profit, then it became a business, and then, I tried to remain as ethical as possible to make sure, I wasn't stepping on any toes, hurting the company's profit or reputation. So there's a lot of interesting rabbit holes we could follow on this. Because, for example, a game that had a very negative player experience due to people coming in and trying to cater to players, farmers. For example, Final Fantasy XI, when it came out in 2003, there were a ton of gold farmers logging in, hoarding resources, camping spawn spots, camping spots for people would like mine ore and minerals and gather plants and things like that. So if you're like a legit player trying to play, you wouldn't be able to you'd have to compete with, farmers just completely camping and destroying the ecosystem of the game. So when I came in and found a few exploits in that game, and I was able to create gold with out of thin air, those farmers went out of business. So there's something interesting that happened there, me finding an exploit and pricing them out of the game cleared up the environment of that game and made it a better game for the players. But yeah, there's a few cases of that where if you do something in a way that's stealthy that drives the farmers away, it's a net benefit for the game company, the players, and for myself. Gotta say the obvious.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're not going to complain about that part.
Right.
What are some of the strangest exploits in some of these systems you've ever seen?
Without getting too technical, there have been a few exploits that I've seen, and I'm not going to name the game. The exploits are really difficult to find, but once you know what you're looking for, they're very obvious, if that makes sense. There were a few exploits I've seen that were very obscure, and it seemed like the exploit itself was obfuscated. They knew somebody would find this exploit, so they took an extra step to obfuscate how it would work. So it feels like there was a bit of an insider threat, programming exploits into the protocol that they would then exploit themselves. So this is putting on your tinfoil hat, and maybe you had a game dev that slipped in a few little Easter eggs or cheat codes, whatever you want to call it, and then after they go back home and use these to their advantage. So there's been a few weird ones like that where it feels like it was planted on purpose. But yeah, I found in close to examining 30 games, I found over 200 exploits. They mostly have a common theme. The most common one is an integer overflow or underflow. That's where you wrap your money value around. Sometimes you can subtract. Let's say you have 0 gold and you find a way to subtract 1 gold from your account balance, then it would roll over to the maximum value that that data value could store, which typically in the 32-bit integer land was 4 or 2 billion, depending on how it was configured. So that was very common. I think that's the most common exploit class, even in 2023.
Oh, wow.
The other common exploit class was data race conditions, where things weren't being checked and acted upon in a sequential manner. So you could sell 2 of a single item very quickly, and you get profit from 2 items for selling 1 item, right? And then there's just crazy logic bugs. There was another game that accidentally, and this is a huge game company that had a really huge game, probably the biggest MMO that existed back in the day. I'll try not to name him, but it rhymes with buzzard.
You're in security, you say.
They launched their game, and I was studying the protocol, and I noticed that the messages, were identified in a way where you could enumerate the functionality of the system. The messages to the server were sequential. So when you log in, the message started with the number 16. When you rename your character, it started with 17. If you move around in the game, the message packet would start with 18. So I was like, wait, what's going on with 0 through 15? And then I started, crafting packets and sending them to the server. I was like, hey, server, process packet 0. And the server came back to me and it's like, hey, error message, invalid format. We need a player name that's in the string format. I was like, what's going on here? So after some fuzzing and trying to go back and forth and trying to get rid of the error message, I was like, all right, here's packet 0. Here's a player name. I think it's the right format. Let me send it. The server does nothing. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Then I put in my friend's name. I was like, oh, packet 0. Here's my friend's name in the game. Send it, and I teleports to them. they're like across the map in a different zone, and I just appear right on top of them. So I was like, this is interesting. This feels like a GM command that's like, hey, teleport to player. So I was able to teleport to anybody in the game just by typing in their player name in this packet, which was fun because if you teleport to the PvP area, so you could like teleport onto somebody, gank him, and teleport back out. So that was fun.
No money to be made, but good for ganking.
Oh yeah. So packets 2 through 16 were interesting, but not as fun as teleporting and ganking people for the lols, as they called it back then.
What came between 6 and 15?
A lot of error messages. I think one of them also acted on the player name and would like give you their chat history, which was interesting. So you could like snoop on people.
Yeah.
A few of them seemed like they'd let you spawn items. I was able to like spawn certain items, but not all the items. Like I would be able to like spawn, let's say, seasonal items like snowballs or something. I was able to spawn those without a problem, but like if I tried to spawn gold, it wouldn't error out. So there was some effort made to like guardrail this functionality, but it was it was baked into the game, and it was active and live for like a year after the game got released. So somebody realized, hey, we published the game with debug commands that the server was processing, and they're like, oops, let's take that out of the code base. One of my favorites is Final Fantasy 11. That game had about 5 to 10 exploits, a lot of them integer overflows. Pretty much anytime you dealt with a stack of items or selling an item to a vendor, interacting with your bank, you could roll things around and just create items out of thin air. Final Fantasy 14 came out, I think, 10 years later, and they forked the code base before they fixed all those exploits. So they forked the code base, and the exact same exploits worked in the game that they released, almost 10 years later. So that was fun. I mean, that cut down my research and development time. I was able to use all my old notes from Final Fantasy 11, and so that was cool and strange. I mean, I could see why they forked the old code base. It's probably easier to augment into whatever they want to sculpt out of it. But it's, when you're forking projects, make sure you're forking a version that, has exploits fixed in it.
There, sure. Don't leave all the vulnerabilities in the thing before you.
Or do. I don't know. Maybe just YOLO. Version 1, commit.
We like to have a little fun here, Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah.
Okay. Any others come to mind?
The Dark Age of Camelot one we went over, that lasted for 13 years. There were a few. Star Wars: The Old Republic and Wildstar Online were, I think, the first games that used 64-bit values to store player attributes like gold. So when I found an integer overflow in that one, I ended up with like 18 quintillion units worth of in-game currency. And if you translate that into the market value, I had about like $100 trillion worth of, currency in this game. So technically, I was a trillionaire on paper, which was pretty cool.
I mean, that brings up a really interesting question, which is like, when you started, this was selling an Ultima Online house on eBay.
Yeah.
That gets axed, obviously. How has the secondary marketplace for digital assets like this changed over the 20 years you've been doing this? Like, where did it start? Where has it arrived? And,
Yeah.
how did it change along the way?
That's a great question. So at first, it started out with peer-to-peer. You have to trust the other party, and you transfer money, and then you transfer the item. So all of that was done via mostly eBay or maybe some forums. Then eBay banned the sale of virtual goods because they didn't feel like enforcing, there was a lot of opportunistic scammers that would like sell you stuff in the game, and they'd take the money and just disappear. So eBay was getting way too many customer complaint, tickets on that kind of stuff. So they just banned the sale of virtual goods, period. And that's when all these, mostly out of Southeast Asia sites popped up, like EGPal, IGE, and they basically acted as a marketplace for players that wanted to buy items and currencies from other players. So I went from selling or operating by myself and just selling on eBay to supplying wholesale in bulk to people like IGE. And my typical workflow was like I'd load up an account with millions worth of gold, not millions worth of gold. It would be in the thousands US dollars, but and then I'd load up these accounts with money, and I'd give the login credentials to IGE.com, and they'd pay me a few hours later. So it was very easy. Every day I just log in, stock up a bunch of accounts, and sell them to IGE, and then they'd pay me later at night. And this was done via PayPal, which was interesting because PayPal froze my account many, many times. They're like, why are you getting money? Where's this money coming from? They were very nosy.
Imagine that.
So yeah, that was challenging. So yeah, you had this huge underground shadow market. And these days, I know people don't like NFTs and Web3. Well, I won't generalize in that way, but it's a very controversial subject that's polarizing people, right? Some people are like, NFTs, no, go away. And some people are like, yeah, NFTs are the future. But the cool thing is like, we're here at GEC and we see a lot of NFT related companies down on the floor. They're trying to promote this sense of player ownership and giving players the power to, control, their assets and giving them the ability to sell their assets to other players. An interesting side note, like I did some napkin math, and the shadow markets that happen outside these games, they are potentially at least 2, but up to 5 times greater than the actual revenue of the underlying game. So game developers in the past and currently aren't harnessing like the full potential of player-to-player trading, and technically it's a form of user-generated content. Like if you're playing a game and you're mining or grinding for items, you're technically generating assets in that game that other players want.
Mm.
So I think the collision of Web3, the Web3 ethos and mentality, and Web2 gaming is creating this interesting area where it's recognized that players want to trade amongst each other. There's huge economies that happen amongst players. And I think the next generation of monetization isn't going to be in-app purchases. It's going to be kind of mirroring a country where you tax, transactions and sales of items to support the game, its infrastructure, and its employees. And it's going to be a symbiotic relationship between revenue of the players and the game companies.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we're here walking around. I was here about 5 years ago, and all the banners were Epic Games, Blizzard, Fortnite. Now it's Web3, Web3, right. Web3, Web3. So much of it is tied up in blockchain, obviously. Do you think that's essential for that cultural shift towards player transaction? Do you think that could be done server side, where a game developer could facilitate those transactions, or do you think there needs to be an external some kind of infrastructure to allow that?
There are a few games that people forgot about. Second Life, for one. It had a player-to-player economy that was very much done in the Web3 style way. The blockchain is nice, but it is, for the most part, just a storage technology. Player ownership can be done server-side and honored by the game company. I think some form of... Well, let me take that back. This is a huge rabbit hole. Like this is an emerging market, and nobody knows where it's going to go. But I think in the end, what's going to emerge is the players will have the power to control their assets in whatever way they want, as long as they comply with local regulations and laws. Losing a sword in a video game might become a taxable event, or
whoa,
right, or getting your account hacked might be a taxable event. There are companies popping up now. I've seen like 4 or 5 of them pop up in the last 6 months, where they're offering insurance for in-game assets. So like if you're in a game and you have a very expensive legendary sword that might be going for a few $100 on like the gray market, they'll insure it. And And it's interesting. I think the future will be a blend of Web3 ethos and technologies and Web2 style centralization. In the short run, who knows what things will look like 10 years out. But I think in the end, players will have ownership of their assets. The underlying technology that's going to make that happen, who knows what that's going to look like.
That's very, very interesting. Losing a sword in an online game becomes a taxable event. That is wild.
Right. I mean, think of all the crazy stuff that could happen around that. Because, I mean, you have insurance fraud now, but if you have insurance on virtual items that there's no traceability on, things get very interesting. It's a very, I mean, it's a brand new industry and there's a lot of sharp edges, but as it evolves, I think it'll be in the player's benefit.
I think about a bank account. Something happens to my bank account, the bank is probably going to help me out. Something happens to the bank and the government's probably going to help me out. What does it mean when my digital asset, something happens to it? Does it matter whether it's stored server side, in which case they'll help me like a bank? Or if it's on the blockchain, they go, oh, that's not our problem. It's this giant set of problems that we have no cultural standard for how to solve.
Yeah. The permanence of an item existing on the blockchain has, pros and cons. One, it's permanent. Two, it's permanent. So if you're involved in a fraudulent transaction, you can't really undo it. There are no refunds on the blockchain. I've seen solutions where they bake in backdoors into smart contracts to maybe potentially give you a backdoor way in for 30 days. Somebody else could come in if they have the right, set of credentials. They could, undo transactions. But then you're just creating Web2 technologies on the blockchain, which is sort of silly.
Sure. Someone steals my car. They can either find my car or I don't have the car. But if I have insurance, you can give me money I can use to go buy a new car. And so scarcity and fungibility in these digital assets becomes really, really important, because is it valuable if they can just make another one and give it to me? Or do they need to give me a currency so I can go buy another one?
Yeah, all of that is just crazy. I mean, if you take a big step back and look at all these technologies, they are trying to push the illusion of scarcity.
Sure.
It's all an illusion. On the blockchain, that illusion of ownership and scarcity is a little bit stronger because it is baked into the code a little bit, and some of that code might be irreversible up to a point until things get hacked and you fork to layer one and you create new things. But it's all an illusion. I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting to watch it evolve. In some ways, it's like reinventing the problems of the 90s in a new way, using new technologies. But then again, it is really creating cool and useful features, and they're being used in ways that we couldn't have envisioned 20 years ago. I mean, imagine talking about NFTs 30 years ago and saying, hey, I made an NFT of a sketch on a piece of tissue paper and it sold for $30,000. You'd get committed to an insane asylum. And here we are, and it's normal, and it's right here on the GDC floor, and people are promoting NFTs and video games.
Digital scarcity is an illusion. I think scarcity is an illusion,
right?
And yet there's such an extraordinary amount of human capital, just everything going into making that illusion feel real. There's so many things over right behind this giant curtain that only work if we accept the premise that scarcity isn't an illusion.
Yeah, it definitely helps. It's I mean, if you're an investor and you're investing in a blockchain project that's promising scarcity, you're going to see some pretty good returns. So it's like this cycle that fuels itself. And there is a lot of backlash against Web3 right now and NFTs and all that stuff. One, because there's a lot of scams on it. Two, it could just be seen as a money play to please investors. Let me go back and there's one thing. So there's many positive things about Web3 and how it's evolving the landscape of ownership and how people and players own things in video games. But I've noticed this one trend that's been bugging me for a while with Web3 is, there's a site called Web3's Going Great. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And it's interesting because it's like, I think Molly White runs it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a website that lists like all the greatest hacks that happen in Web3, and it like tallies up how many billions of dollars have been lost. And sometimes, I'll research a specific hack that happened on Web3 that maybe, ended up in the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars, or people getting their wallets compromised. And I'll do some research. I'll go on forums, and people will, they'll defend the technology and they'll be like, oh, no, it was the user's fault. They were using their wallet incorrectly. It's like the Steve Jobs thing, like, our phone isn't broken. You're just holding it wrong. I'm not sure how prevalent this is, or if I just like zoned in on it, but there's a lot of victim shaming, blaming in Web3. It's like, you got hacked because it was your fault. Don't blame the Web3 technology. It's perfect. It's precious. It's godlike. It's holy. You shall not speak badly about Web3. It was your fault.
I mean, that's really interesting, that mindset of the technology is perfect. It's your fault that you got hacked. Do you ever reflect on that 20 years in the video game hacking industry? Do you ever think back on users? Did you ever hack users, or was it always the systems in the games?
It was always the system. I never went after specific users. I mean, I did use hacks to like teleport to players and kill them, but that's part of the game-ish.
That's different.
I never deprived the player of value of their items or their game account. I forgot what where we were going.
No, I think you answered that question pretty nicely. It just seemed it's like an interesting parallel when you think about video game hacking as a precursor to a whole new kind of crime that we're encountering for the first time as people start trying to create more digital assets. It's, for years it was just stealing some gold in a video game, and now it's like, well, that you're trying to argue that's money. Like that this is digital money. Web3 people are trying to argue that. It evokes video game hacking, and it's interesting.
It does. There are some parallels around it. In the video game hacking days, when I was creating items out of thin air, it was really out of thin air. I was just telling the server, hey, give me 1 million gold in like a roundabout way through an exploit that was very technical. But when you're talking about Web3, the ownership lies with the custodian, which is the end user, and it's their responsibility to be their own bank and be as secure as their own bank, which I'm sure has never backfired.
Never.
Yeah, being a bank is easy.
Yeah, it's super easy. Yeah, nothing bad ever happens to those.
Right, yeah. So the technology of Web3, is evolving. I think, systems and mechanisms will evolve in a way where, people can be their own bank, but they're going to have to give up a sense of ownership. Things will be a little bit more centralized. I'm sure most people that interact with Web3 interact with it through a centralized exchange, which for the most part is great, unless you happen to be unfortunate enough to do business with FTX.
Oh, man. So when did you go from being Manfred back to being Adrian?
So I quit hacking for a profit in 2017. I went public as Manfred. I tried to create, the separate persona that wasn't very easily trackable back to me, because I didn't know what the reception would have been, and I don't know what the sentiment towards that will be 10, 15 years down the line. I don't want people Googling my name and going, oh, this guy was hacking video games for a profit, because that sounds bad, and it could be bad unless you know the backstory, but people tend to read only the headlines, and clickbait headlines could really cause some problems. So I tried to be careful in the first few years, but the response from people I've talked with were very positive. When I went public at DEF CON, I met people from a lot of the game companies, I've done quote unquote business with, and, they were very cool. They were like, how did you pull this off? We have a security team internally, and, we weren't able to cache these things. And I sat them down. I opened up my laptop. Here's my notes. Here's how I did it. So they were very receptive, and I was very happy to hear that. So just over time, the lines just blurred. I didn't really care. It's like sometimes I talk publicly as Manfred, sometimes as Adrian, sometimes on my PowerPoint slides, I have a picture from my UO days of like Manfred riding a horse. I kind of stopped caring. The response has been super positive. Developers are super nice. They love learning, they love security, and I love talking about it. So I kind of just melded into Adrian, I guess.
Mandrian. I was talking with a buddy before I came up here, and he listened to your talk that you gave 2 days ago, I think. And he just brought up that, he's a programmer now. And the way he kind of first started mucking around inside computers was cracking video games and messing around with games. And I think that that's such a common experience. And so while maybe most people that end up in that space don't then have a 20-year intermediary career cracking games, it's such a common experience to say, I love this piece of software. I spend so much time in it. I want to understand what makes it tick and how to take it apart and put it back together.
Yeah, 100%. Like when you're curious and you're technical and you're interested in programming or security or just how things work, games are great because they're very interactive and you get that instant gratification. It's like, let me spend a few hours like hooking up a debugger, a memory viewer, maybe a process tracer, see how the game interacts with the operating system. And then if you're doing like a single player game, you can be like, hey, this game loads a save file from this location on the file system. Let me pop open the save file. Oh, it's in clear text. It's like a JSON file that says, here's my level, here's how much gold I have, because it's a single player game, they don't really want to protect it. Sometimes the save file will be encrypted, and that's a new rabbit hole. It's like, how does this game load this save file, and how does it decrypt it? So then you gotta, open up your debugger and put breakpoints on like file read and operating system, operations that open files. And then you just walk back and see how the code interacts with that file, find the decryption function. After that file is decrypted and it's in memory, like what are the values there? What can you modify? So we learn a lot that way, and it's edutainment because it's like you're messing with this game and you're able to like give yourself infinite lives or extra items in the game or extra health. So it's definitely cool. The reward is pretty instant, and just learning, it helps you learn super quick about how operating systems work, how games are compiled, how they interact with the file system. And then when you move on to online games, it's a similar process, but the game save file doesn't really exist on your computer. It's on the server, and it's you have to interact with it with APIs that the server handles. And then you just fall down the rabbit hole, slam a bunch of Red Bulls, and lose your suntan. You become that person that's in the basement just hacking away, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're in a building with 20,000 people that are interested or actively make video games, and I imagine a lot of them, on some level, there was a moment where they started taking those games apart, and that's probably what sent them on a path towards being here and getting to make these things.
Yeah, 100%. I remember my first computer was like a Commodore 64 back in like 1984, and there were magazines back then, and the magazines had actual game code like printed in the magazine. So you'd type it from the magazine onto your terminal on your Commodore 64, hit run, it'll probably crash and not compile, and then you gotta fix all the typos and stuff, and then the game runs. And it's like, oh cool, I just downloaded the game from a magazine, which is cool. But then you can like study the code and see how it works. Like, hey, there's like a physics function here where I can tweak it, maybe jump higher, or here's where my health is calculated so I can make myself take less damage, and here's my attack function. Maybe I can like multiply my attack by 10 and kill things in one hit. So I definitely enjoyed, when I was growing up, creating games from a magazine, basically tweaking them, seeing how they work. And then somehow it's snowballed into a 20-year career where I hack games for a living, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, the line between taking things apart and making new things gets really blurry, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say like, they were very curious growing up and they'd take apart toasters, but video games are basically just really complicated toasters.
Can I quote you on that?
Yeah, and they print money sometimes.
So what's next for you, man?
What's next for me? I'm doing a lot of things now. Mainly, I'm interested in cybersecurity still. I think I always will be. I've always had a curious nature, and that's never going away. So right now I'm at GEC. And I'm interested in talking with game companies about game security. I'm like, hey, I've spent 20 years hacking video games and nothing's really changing. So right now I'm trying to build a coalition of big name game studios to back me on creating gaming security standards, because there are no gaming security standards that exist out there. So I'm drafting a document that will outline best practices and common attack vectors in single player games, online games, and Web3 games. So I'll be like, here's what you guys should look out for. Here's all the boxes you need to check to make sure you validate, code was tested, things are running properly, you tested all the things around critical systems where players may or may not lose value on if those systems are exploited. So I'm hoping to create, security standards for the gaming industry, which is a huge project, but I think it'll be fun.
30-second elevator pitch. What are those standards? What are some of the big themes that you need to see in something like that for it to work?
Step 1, don't get hacked. Step 2, see step 1.
It's a short document.
That's the spoiler alert here. It's complicated. Security is complicated. So after I quit hacking games for a profit in 2017, I did security consulting for companies like Disney, Netflix, Google. I actually helped Disney craft the Motion Picture Association of America security standards for content distribution, because studios, want to protect their content. They don't want their movies to leak out prematurely before they hit theaters. There is no silver bullet when it comes to security. If you Google the MPA security standards document, it's about a zillion pages. There's some spreadsheet forms and a lot of boxes you need to check. But you need to take care of application security, physical security. You need to make sure that the people that are working on the games don't have too much authorization and access to critical systems, because insider threats are a thing, especially as games evolve and players have assets that are more valuable. I'm a huge fan of Ultima Online and a lot of Raf Koster's musings on his blogs. And back in the Ultima Online days, game masters would go rogue and they'd just generate items out of thin air and sell them on eBay. So insider threats are a huge thing, and they will be, even a larger thing once, these assets get more and more valuable. And especially when you type in some of the Web3 ethos of giving players true ownership, which will boost the value of these assets and the legality of them. Because right now it's against the terms of service to sell items for money. And when that's legitimized, insider threats will be more of a problem. So I'm going to cover all those fields and make sure that steps are outlined to make sure that you test your code. You test your code against these specific functions, against these classes of vulnerabilities. You follow these standards, and it's a lot of hard work. I mean, I wish I could say check these 10 boxes and you'll be secure, but it doesn't work that way. Security is a process, and it needs to be baked into the workflow on a continuous basis. It's not something you can just slap on once and call it done. It's a continuous process.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I know you're running around. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Anytime you want to chat games and hacking, I'm around.
Convene underneath this weird UFO again.
I don't know what's going on. I've had 6 hours of sleep in the last 3 days, and this seems very surreal.
Thanks for taking the time, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. See ya.